to see you guys today. Welcome to North Shore, especially those of you who are online. We are so glad to have you here with us as well. I'm Wolfgang. I work here, and just an honor to get to be part of this important series that we've been in over these last few weeks. You know, I've told you probably many times before that my family and I love to road trip. This is one of our favorite things that we do. We will jump in a car and go crazy distances, turn right around and come back as crazy day trips just to explore and see things and so on. And we've been doing this for a long time. Now, my wife Lori and I, we have 3 kids, all of whom are teenagers. But even when they were little, it was a priority for us to just take them places and see stuff. And like many parents, we did our best to keep them kind of mellow for long car rides in the back seat. And we'd use things like puzzles and games and other kinds of activities because they were still a little too young to have phones or tablets or whatever. Now that they're teenagers, they have those things. We forget they're back there, quite frankly, and we can go for days. But back then, when things would get really tense or when fights would begin to break out in the back seat, we would whip out a classic strategy that parents have tried to use for generations to get their kids to settle down. You may be familiar with it. It's known as the quiet game. Have you heard of the quiet game? Some of you have played the quiet game. The rules of the quiet game are simple. Be quiet, right? And the object of the game is to stay silent as long as possible. The one who stays quiet longest wins. Have you played this? Anybody in the room? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. You've either used this or you've had to play it yourself. This quiet game has been around forever. I have this sneaking suspicion that Joseph and Mary used this on Jesus and his siblings, like on the back of the donkey when they were being a little rambunctious or something like that. Now, I'll be honest, in our family, this never actually worked because as competitive as our family can be, our kids caught on to the trick pretty young and would basically say, I lose, and go right on talking or making noise or fighting or whatever it was. Now, the reason I bring this up is because sometimes in the church, we play the quiet game. There are certain issues, and many of them we just don't talk about. And in this series, what we've been doing is taking those kinds of subjects head on, these ones that we tend to play the quiet game with. Uncomfortable topics like anxiety, like grief, like loneliness. I mean, there are issues that almost everyone deals with in one form or another at some point in their lives, and yet sometimes we play the quiet game. We never acknowledge the struggles. We don't talk directly about them. We just see how long we can go being quiet. And one of the topics that tends to get the quiet game treatment is the issue of depression. Now, there are lots of reasons we do this. Depression's complicated. We play the quiet game because we're not exactly sure how things like brain chemistry and hormones and trauma factors and other kinds of psychological issues or family background or genetics or spiritual factors, we're not sure how that all comes together into this stew known as depression. And we're not really sure what to say to people who are struggling with it. There aren't simple solutions that we can just sort of recite to make things all better. It's messy, it's confusing. The reasons go on, but often we just stay quiet. And here's the reason this is such a big deal. It's that as churches play the quiet game, so do the people who struggle with depression. They quietly battle thoughts that tell them things are hopeless. They just stay quiet about the feelings of despair that they're struggling with, that they're not sure what to do with or how to handle. They feel trapped in this darkness that they can't escape. But they get this impression that those kinds of feelings are not welcome in a place like this. Better to just hide them. That if you're a good Christian, you wouldn't be depressed. And those kinds of feelings, well, then there must be some sort of spiritual weakness in me, some sort of deficiency in me spiritually. And so people who wrestle with these issues learn to do one of two things. They either hide or just disappear, or, even more dangerous, they learn to pretend, to fake that they're okay, to put on the happy face, or to mask what they're feeling. And some, they get so good at hiding and faking that eventually no one realizes until something heartbreaking takes place. In the last couple years, I've known of at least 3 pastors who have struggled with this issue of depression and lost. As a matter of fact, just this last Thursday, the pastor of a large network of churches in Tacoma took his own life. Now, some had made reference to their struggles openly in a setting like this. Others seemed to give no indication whatsoever. People had no idea anything was wrong until that shocking news that they had committed suicide. And for whatever reason, they didn't feel like they could be open about the fact that things in their life were not okay. See, this impacts a lot of people, believers and unbelievers, the famous and the obscure, the rich and the poor, the young and the old, all demographic categories. And when we play the quiet game, it sends the message that it's not okay to be not okay. And that's why we're even doing this series in the first place. Because we keep saying over and over, we at North Shore want to be the kind of church where it's okay to not be okay. We want to be a fake-free zone, which I practice saying again and again so I wouldn't stumble on that one. We want to be a fake-free zone. We don't want to play the quiet game when it comes to our struggles and our secrets, whatever they may be. We want to be a place where we can be honest and open about real things like this and experience compassion and love and support instead of judgment and rejection. Now, this is especially important when it comes to depression because the stats are overwhelming. I mean, studies quote different numbers from different time periods, but the bottom line is the universal conclusion is that this issue is a significant deal for a whole lot of people. And beyond those who are personally dealing with some form of depression, there are so many people, maybe even more, who struggle because someone they love wrestles with this. And they don't know what to do. They don't know how to help. Now, when we talk about depression, we're talking about a whole range of emotions and feelings. Generally, depression is this persistent feeling of sadness, this loss of desire or interest in things that you once enjoyed. I'm talking, of course, though, about more than just a little blue or feeling sort of melancholy. Depression can be this heaviness or darkness that creeps into your life. It can consume you. And when depression hits, this darkness, which is an image or metaphor that's often used when talking about depression, this darkness can be overwhelming. This happens in the lives of many people. There's what you might call situational depression. This can be brought on by some set of circumstances. Maybe it's a disappointment. Maybe it's the loss of a relationship. Maybe a kid moves away to college, or a child is born in many cases. Maybe something happens in a relationship. Someone breaks up with you, or something happens in school. You bomb a test, or at work, where maybe you lose an account, or whatever it is. Bottom line, things don't go as you hope they would go. And this situational depression can last however long based on the intensity of that struggle or challenge. Now, of course, living in the Northwest, we also know that our mood can be greatly affected by our weather, right? I mean, there's a literal darkness that rolls in when the gray clouds come. And when the sun is no longer seen for who knows how long, right? We'll see how long it goes this year. It's in those seasons that some people wrestle with a very real emotional darkness that rolls in as well. They just don't feel like they can shake that funk that they're feeling. Bottom line is most of us feel this in one degree probably or another. But there are deeper seasons of depression, what might be called clinical depression. And this can go very deep, where you struggle to function, when you can't get out of bed, when the hopelessness is just too much to bear. Sometimes you even lose your desire to live. And again, this is so complicated. There's very real physiological factors around brain chemistry and hormones and neurotransmitters, all of which God made in the first place, remember? There are issues around family history and genetic predispositions and mental health issues. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend I'm one here today, but I am a pastor. And as I was reading and researching for this message, one of the things that kept coming up again and again and again was the need for churches and pastors to talk about this, to try to bring the subject into the light, to help remove some of the stigma that can be associated with this or other kinds of mental health issues. We can't play the quiet game on this. Besides that, I know in a room this size, and with probably even more people that are watching online, there are people who are experiencing some degree of depression in your life right now. You know what this darkness feels like. In fact, for some of you, it took everything you had to get here today, to get out of bed, to get on your clothes, to get in your car, to make your way over here. Frankly, there may be some watching online right now that today was just a bad day, and you couldn't muster that energy, and so you're joining us through that. Whether you're in this room or you're joining us online, I want you to know I am so glad that you're a part of this today. I want you to know I have been praying so hard for you and for these moments. Because I'm not going to pretend to be able to give simple answers to take away the pain that you may be feeling. But it has been my prayer this entire week that God would use His words and my words to somehow encourage you. The word encourage simply means to put courage in. That somehow through these moments we spend together, that you will find the courage you need to go another day, to go on. Because you're not alone. This week I was revisiting some of the stories throughout Scripture of great heroes of the faith, people of renown who did great things with God. And I thought of so many of them who themselves dealt with some degree of depression in their own lives. Some of them unexpected names. For instance, Moses, Elijah, Jonah. And these are great people of the Bible who at times in their lives were so overwhelmed by the pressure they felt that they openly prayed that God would let them die. For example, Elijah, who was on the run, who had just witnessed an amazing miracle, which is a whole other conversation. He suddenly swings to the other end of the spectrum and is so down, so dejected, so overwhelmed by the darkness and stress in his life. Listen what he says in 1 Kings 19, in the second half of verse 4. It says, Elijah sat down under a tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. Some of you know how that feels. I've had enough, Lord. I'm done. There's a prophet named Jeremiah who was so grieved, so disappointed over the way that his society was going, the horrible things he was witnessing in his day, that he wrote these words in Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 14 and 15. Listen to what he says. Cursed be the day I was born, he says. May the day my mother bore me be not blessed. Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. I mean, how down do you have to be to say, I hate my birthday, right? Just scratch September 26th off the calendar, right? I hate it. Cursed be that day. Not only that, I hate the guy who told everybody it's a boy. Like the guy that passed out the cigars, I hate that guy, right? Curse on him. It's pretty dark stuff in the Bible. There's a man named Job who's famously known for the level of personal tragedy that he endured in his life. His family was killed in a freak accident. He lost everything he had to thieves. There are entire chapters where he just goes on articulating, describing the deep depression that he felt in vivid language. For example, Job chapter 30, verses 15 through 17. He says, terrors overwhelm me, he says. Then skip down a bit. He says, now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. I mean, that is vivid. Some of you know that feeling when the darkness isn't just some surface feeling, when it just goes so deep into your bones. Job was there. And of course, there's David, King David, one of the most important characters in all the Bible. A man described as being after God's own heart. And in 2 Samuel chapter 12, we read that when he found out about the illness of his child, he went into a deep depression, so deep, in fact, he couldn't eat, he couldn't wash himself, he couldn't even get up off the floor for a period of days. Now, what's my point of recounting all these people? My point is simple and very important, I think. Some of God's brightest saints dealt with the darkest depression. Some of God's brightest saints dealt with the darkest depression. And I bring this up because sometimes people in that darkness will feel as though God has abandoned them, that they are unusable to him, that he's not interested in their struggle, that there's no hope, that their life has no value, no purpose. But let me be so clear. There is no such thing as a life that doesn't matter. Every life has a purpose. You are not an accident. God knew and loved and had a purpose for each of those people in his word. Friends, he loves and knows and has a purpose for your life as well. And I know for some, those words ring hollow because you don't feel it right now. As I was listening to one of the interview this week where a pastor was talking about some of this, he said, depression makes you forget everything you know about God. I think that's true. You get in such a dark place, you just sort of forget everything you know about God. And some of you have experienced that. What do you do when that kind of darkness rolls in, when that depression takes over, when you don't feel like God loves you, and when you aren't even sure there's any meaning left to life? Well, again, I'm not going to pretend to be able to give you 3 easy steps on how to fix this, but here's what I'm learning and what I've learned about helping people through this darkness. Either if you yourself were there, or if someone you love is there and you don't know how to help. Here's the first thing I think God's word teaches us. It's talk to yourself. Talk to yourself. Now, generally, when it comes to conversations about mental health, talking to yourself is not seen as a hallmark of goodness, right? I mean, that's generally discouraged. But this, not the kind of talking to yourself I'm referring to. I think this kind of talking to yourself is a very good thing. And let me explain what I'm sort of mean. I'm at the age now where quite routinely I will walk into a new room or upstairs only to realize I have no idea what I came for. Do you have those moments? If you haven't had them yet, they're coming, my friend. Prophetic moment, all right? Where I'll just sort of walk in there and like, what did I need from the kitchen? Why am I here? Or why did I run upstairs? What was it that I needed in my room? These moments happen with increasing frequency, I'm noticing. But here's the reason I bring it up. If the simple walk from my living room to my kitchen is enough to make me forget something that I need or know, then my goodness, the trauma of darkness rolling into your life is certainly enough to cause you to forget things that you normally would recall without a problem. Sometimes I have to remind myself, oh yeah, what's that truth again? Oh yeah, what's that I believe again? And we see an example of this in a beautiful passage in the Psalms. The writer, in a very dark place, recounts some of his pain and then engages in talking to himself in a very good way. Here's what it says in Psalm 42, verse 9 and following. I say to God, my rock, why have you forgotten me? That feeling of abandonment. Why have you forgotten me? Why must I go on mourning, oppressed by the enemy? My bones suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt me, saying to me all day long, where is your God? And then we see the writer in a bit of a dialogue with himself. Verse 11, why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, he tells himself. For I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. Sometimes you just have to remind yourself, I may not feel it, but I am going to hang on to these promises. Some of these passages we've come back to again and again in this series, Psalm 46:1 being one of them. God is our refuge, a place of safety, and he is our strength, our source of power, an ever-present help in trouble. Not just there when the times are good, not just there when we feel him even, but an ever-present help in trouble. a safe place when we need it, the power when we don't have it, and a presence even when we don't feel it. Remind yourself of that promise. Talk to yourself. Why so downcast, O my soul? Put your hope in God. When those negative thoughts of hopelessness and despair, when they wash in, when you find yourself in the middle of that darkness, sometimes you just have to remind yourself of these truths. Take that Psalm 46:1, memorize it, make it the wallpaper on your phone so when you see it, you're just reminded of that truth. You are loved. You are wanted. Your struggle is not your identity. Your illness, not your identity. Your past is not your future. You are loved. Sometimes we also have to remind ourselves that no emotion, no feeling, whether it's a good one or a bad one, none of that lasts forever. I heard Pastor Rick Warren talk about this. Some of you may know his name. He pastors one of the larger churches in America down in Southern California. His claim to fame is more well known as having written The Purpose-Driven Life. Some of you probably read that book. It's actually the best-selling book in American history outside the Bible. Anyway, Pastor Rick, who wrote that book, what you may not know is that he had a 27-year-old son who committed suicide a few years ago after a lifelong battle with mental illness. And he talks very openly, very passionately, very candidly about that pain and struggle in his life. And I listened to a number of messages and interviews with Rick preparing for this talk. And one of the things he kept returning to was the importance of remembering that no emotion, whether good or bad, lasts. He kind of compared emotions to the waves of the sea, of the ocean. He said, they come into our lives and they crash, but then they dissipate. And yes, more waves may come, they may crash, but they too will dissipate. No feeling lasts forever. Just take it one wave at a time. So even as you are here today or listening right now, whatever you're feeling right now, you will not feel the exact same way in 2 or 4 hours. Even when the depression is intense, it cannot last forever. It is a wave that will go away because no emotion lasts. And this is particularly important for those who may be here or listening and thinking about hurting yourself. If you're in that place, I want you to know, I am so glad you're here today or listening to this. There are people who care and want to help. In fact, there's a number I think all of us should probably carry around in our phones. Just have it programmed in there. It's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, 1-800-273-TALK. It is available 24/7, and there are people there who will help. They really will. But if you're in that place and you're listening to me right now, it is so important that you hear me on this. All feelings are temporary, both good and bad. And here's my plea. Please don't make a permanent choice to try to fix a temporary situation. And suicide is a permanent, irreversible attempt to try to solve a temporary problem. And as many in this room know, and maybe some listening, this is a decision that has such greater impact than we can ever imagine on the lives of those who care about us. It's just not a wise solution to solve a temporary problem with such a permanent solution. You know, most people, they really don't want to end their lives. They just want to end their pain. And when you feel overwhelmed by your pain or your problems, it may feel as though taking your life is the best solution. It's not. God's purpose for your life is greater than that pain that you're feeling right now. And there are much better ways to make that pain stop. Which brings us to the second thing that I'd say if you're struggling with depression today. Talk to another person. Talk to another person. You were not designed to carry the pain of life alone. The Bible teaches so clearly in the New Testament book of Galatians, chapter 6, verse 2, The Apostle Paul writes this. He says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. This is a command from God. Carry one another's burdens. I'm supposed to help you. You're supposed to help me when we're down. And I'll tell you, there are people who would gladly do this, no matter how isolated you may feel right now. There are people who would gladly do this for you if you'll stop playing the quiet game and just be open and honest about what's going on. We have teams of people here at North Shore who have a heart and the training for those that are struggling in these areas, who can walk with you and be a listening ear and point you to God's truth and support you through that season. We call it one-to-one care around here. And if you grab the card in the back of the seat in front of you, you see a little response card, you write your name and your contact info, and you simply write the word help in that prayer request section. Drop that in the offering bucket a little later in the service, or online right now. You can comment or message one of our moderators to let them know you need that sort of help. A member of our team will be in touch with the resources that are available to walk you through those challenges, or at least to help. Simply let us know you need the help, because we were never designed to carry the pain of life alone. We are wired for relationship. We are better together. In fact, the very first thing he said after he created human beings, that it wasn't good for us to be alone. We're made to share our burdens and our emotions with each other. You need to find a person you can trust and tell them exactly how you're feeling. You may also want to talk to a Christian counselor or therapist. This has always struck me as sort of crazy, frankly. When someone's pipes spring a leak at their house, they don't hesitate for a second to call a plumber. There's no embarrassment. When someone's furnace stops blowing hot air, they don't wonder, gosh, what will people think if I call the furnace guy? What I found, though, is when people struggle with relationships or emotions, they're sometimes embarrassed or hesitant to call a professional like a counselor for help. Friends, hear me. Depression is treatable. It is treatable. And sometimes that treatment can involve medication, because the reality is there are often chemical issues in the brain that contribute to some of these issues. Sometimes our brains just don't work right. And if other parts of our body aren't working right, if you have high blood pressure or acid reflux, there's no lack of faith behind deciding to use medication as part of your treatment. The same is true of depression and these kinds of mental health issues. So let me just say this very directly. It is not a sin to be sick. It's not a lack of faith to use medication any more than it's a lack of faith to use radiation or chemo if you're battling cancer. Medications may not be right for everybody, but they can be a helpful part of restoring balance to some of the chemistry in our brains. God's given us these resources. The bottom line is this: talk to another person. Let them know what you're going through. Let them point you toward the help that you need. And let me quickly say, for those who have loved ones who are struggling with this, because I know this touches so many lives, you need others too. To watch someone you care about struggle with this darkness can be incredibly hard. You can feel powerless, you're not sure what to say, you're not sure what to do, you're not sure how to help. You need support as well. So reach out to someone, maybe a friend, maybe someone here at our church, maybe a Christian counselor. You can't play the quiet game either. Talk to another person who can pray with you, support you, walk with you through those kinds of challenges. So for those that are in this place right now, again, talk to yourself. Remind yourself what's true. Talk to another person. Let somebody know what you're really feeling. And then last, certainly not least, and maybe a bit predictable, but the core of it all, talk to God. Talk to God. We've said it many times in this series. God is big enough to even handle your struggles. He is bigger than your fear, bigger than your anxiety, bigger than your loneliness, bigger than this depression. No matter how powerful it might feel, He is more powerful. Psalm 34:18, it's been sort of a theme verse through this entire series. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Crushed in spirit. What a vivid description of what so many people sometimes feel. The promise is he's close. So remind yourself of that. And I know that can actually be a real struggle for some people. Because those who struggle in these ways, they sometimes get even more depressed because they cry out to God. They say, Lord, heal me, make me better, give me some hope. But for whatever reason, they don't feel like things get better in the way or in the time that they want. Now, do I believe that God can instantly lift the clouds and restore your mental health and hope? Absolutely. I've seen it. And I pray that if you're in that place, that God delivers you quickly from that place of darkness. I believe he can do that. But here's one of the things that I've learned in walking with Jesus now for 30 or so years. Just because Jesus can doesn't mean he will. Just because he can heal cancer doesn't mean he will. Just because Jesus can heal mental illness doesn't always mean he will in the way or in the time that we want. And I can't tell you why. It's one of the things that sometimes leaves me scratching my head, or quite frankly, sometimes crying over the weight or grief of a friend who's suffering. I so long to see Jesus come in and do the miraculous things I know he can do, that I've seen him do. I don't always understand this, friends, but here's what I do know. He will be with you. Even if the healing doesn't come as you want it, when you want it, he promises to be with you, and I've always seen him come through on that. Psalm 23, that famous "The Lord is my shepherd" psalm, down in verse 4, he says, "Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." He's with you, even in the darkest. Why? Because God's not afraid of the dark. Why? Because God does some of his best work in the dark. And that's good news. Think about this. Jesus knows what it's like to come face to face with darkness. Friends let him down, treated unfairly, abused in horrific ways, to reach a point, rock bottom, where even on the cross, Jesus himself says, God, where are you? Are you there? Why have you abandoned me? Why have you forsaken me? Seems to be the darkest moment of all. And yet in that darkness, at that dark moment, when they pulled Jesus' lifeless body off a cross, when they took it into that cold stone in that dark tomb and laid it there, in the middle of that darkness, a few days later, God showed there is no darkness so deep that he cannot heal it. And when that stone from that tomb rolled back and light shot into that darkness, when air once again filled Jesus' lungs in that grave, God proved he does his best work in the dark. And the same is true of the dark place where you find yourself right now. If he was able to do the greatest miracle ever in that dark tomb, well, that means there's hope for you no matter how dark you may seem or feel. So here's what I want to do. We're going to do something a little different together today. I want us to actually practice this idea of being a community where no one stands alone, where it's okay to not be okay. Let me explain what we're going to do, and then I'm going to give you a chance to be part of it. See, some in this room, I know you are in the middle of some depression right now, as well as those who are online, and I'll say a few things about that in a moment. But for those here in this room, if you're in one of those dark seasons right now, if this is something you struggle with and you've been trying so hard to hold it together through this talk, I want you to know that even though many of us may not know all of the details of your story, we care about you. We stand with you. And so in just a moment, what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you're in one of those dark seasons, whether it's some chronic thing you've dealt with for years, whether it's something more situational or seasonal, or you're just in that place right now, what I'm going to ask you to do is find the strength and the courage to raise your hand in just a few moments, to identify and admit, I'm in that place right now, as a way of actually talking to other people, of acknowledging it in the open. You're done playing the quiet game, to pretend to have it all together. The truth is, you're tired, you're in a hard place right now, and it's okay to not be okay. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. And then here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask others who are around you to just come over and stand near you, to just stand beside you. They're not going to touch you. They're not going to say anything to you. They're not going to ask your name or your story. They're just going to stand there as a symbolic reminder that you are not alone in the middle of whatever darkness you're facing, that others care. And then we're going to have a few moments to pray silently for those who have raised their hand. Now, for those of you who do stand near someone who raises their hand, again, your job's not to fix them. You just stand there as a symbolic presence to remind them they're not alone. And you pray silently that God will just bring light into their darkness and hope into their despair and joy even into their pain. And then what I'm going to do is for those online, because I know there are those who are watching this right now who, for whatever reason, simply couldn't bring themselves either to come to our campus today, or it's even impressive that you were able to log on and find this video. If you're in that place, what I want to do is, as we're praying over each other in this room, I'd like to pray over you, to let you know that you're not alone, that even though we may not be sitting there physically right now, we believe God is, and that His presence is all that you need. So would you all just bow your heads with me right now? Let's enter into this time. God, I thank you. I thank you that you've created your family, your church, your body as a place where we don't have to hide, where we don't have to pretend, fake it. This is a fake-free zone. And so, God, these next moments are going to be so important for some people, I believe. Because maybe for the first time, they're going to find the courage to admit they aren't perfect, that they're hurting in some deep way, and they need your hope and your healing and your light in their darkness. And so if you're in this room right now and you're in that place, would you just find the courage right now to raise your hand? Raise it high so the people around you can see. We've had dozens and dozens of people do this all morning. If you're in that place, put your hand up. There's no reason to pretend that you have it all together. This is a fake-free zone. Take advantage of this moment. Don't miss out on it. What I'm going to do in just a moment, I'm going to ask the people around you to look and to come and stand near you. So take advantage. Don't miss this chance. There's hands all around. Those who are sitting around them, would you just look around? Would you make sure that everybody has a few folks near them? And I know the rows are a little tight, whatever. Just make your way over there, stand behind them, stand beside them, stand in front of them. Just stand near them and let them know they're not alone. Keep your hand up, please, so people can see, because we want you to know we're here with you. Come near us. If there's anyone, look around. Make sure, please don't let anybody's hand be by itself. Come around them. So here's what I'm going to do, friends, here on our campus. In just a moment, I'm going to pray for our online friends. And while I'm praying, I want you to either silently just echo the prayer I'm saying or pray silently that God will bring light into darkness, hope into despair, and even restore joy in the midst of pain, okay? So just pray silently for that as I pray with our friends online. You know, I am so incredibly glad that you've joined us through this screen. And so thankful for your openness to hear what God has to say, even in the middle of your struggle and your pain right now. And as I said, even though we can't be there with you right now, we want you to know you are loved, that you matter, whether you're in this room or whether you're wherever you're watching this. And so I want to pray for you and these others right now. Dear God, I thank you because you know every name, you know every story. And you are greater. Greater than the darkness, greater than the despair, greater than the pain. So, Father, I pray that you will show yourself true to that promise to come near those who are brokenhearted. God, I thank you for those in this room and who are watching online right now who've had the courage to acknowledge their need for you, to cry out to you. God, I pray you will give them what they need to begin to talk to themselves. Remind them of the things that are easy to forget, the truth of the fact that we're loved by you. God, I pray you'll give each of them the courage to tell someone else. For those online, maybe even to type, I could use some help, or to private message our moderators who can follow up and begin the conversation. And then to find the courage to look up, to talk to you, to ask you, even if we don't feel it, to remind us that we are yours and that we are loved. I thank you, Lord, that you do your best work in the darkness. So show yourself powerful by bringing healing to my friends. I thank you for your promises and pray all this in the name of the one who chases darkness with a word, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Those here on our campus, would you have a seat? Here's what we're going to do. Together, we're going to thank God by talking to him. And those of you who are in this place where your heart is heavy, I just want to commend you for having the courage to put your hand up. And let me say, others who might be here, who for whatever reason, you just couldn't do it. You couldn't get that hand up. It's okay. Why don't you take one of those cards in the back of the chair, write your name and just the word prayer on that card. And then after we've sung this song and our offering begins, you can drop that card in there and we'll be praying for you as well. So right now we're going to talk to God. And we're going to remind ourselves by celebrating that he's a good, good Father. It's who he is, and that we are loved by him. It's who we are. So let's hold on to that promise as we celebrate him together.